Right, so let me start by introducing myself. My name's Davey from Peace Officers UK. And what I do is I go around giving talks on how to deal with bailiffs at your door or TV licence or anybody who comes demanding something from you that doesn't have a right to be there, whether they believe they have a right or not. Okay, your home is your sovereign state. Okay, it's not an address, it's only an address under the Maritime Admiralty system. Okay, a registered address. The word register means the removal of your sovereignty. Okay? Registration is the removal of your sovereignty. So anything you have to register for, put your details, you're giving away your sovereignty. Regus means king, means sovereign. Okay? And stration, you only have to think of castration, the removal of. Okay, so registration is the removal of your sovereignty, right? While you're in your home, you are a sovereign being. You are a living man or woman, okay? Doesn't matter about the other 300 genders, but you are a living man or woman.
Hey, but can you just explain sovereign for a second?
Sovereign means only your creator is above you, okay? Nobody else is above you. So something that is created by man, because it's created by man, it can't be above man, right? So the legal system was created by man, so you are above that. So what they have to do is trick you into declaring yourself as a dead entity, okay, a legal fiction, and that's where your birth certificate comes into it, because when you're born, you're treated as nothing more than a vessel. You're not treated as a life. They know life was given, okay, because they've got a record of it. But then they decided, we can't see you anymore. You become invisible to us, okay? We can't see you as a living person. Living being, okay? You are now beyond the seas, okay? Now, the reason they get to do that is because Maritime Admiralty law covers every body of water on the planet, okay? And you are gestated in fluid, predominantly water. You are born through a birth canal, okay? These are like shipping terms, okay? Birth relates to shipping birth, okay? So when your parents, okay, the pair that rents, yeah, the child, set up your birth certificate, yeah, they didn't know what they were signing up to. They didn't know that actually they were creating a trust in your absence, okay, because you don't exist anymore. Yeah. Well, as far as the Crown Corporation is concerned, you don't exist anymore. You are lost beyond the seas. And this was brought into law, obviously, during the Great Fire of London, 1666, with the Settercave Act, 1666, which declared, because what happened was, obviously, London was on fire, right? Now, whether you believe that it was a piece of charcoal falling from the fire in a bakery, or whether you believe that it was intentionally created in order to burn down all of the churches, because all of the churches contained all of the birth, death and marriage records, right? As soon as those were burnt down due to the Great Fire of London, King Charles II updated an act, okay, the Settercave Act of, I think it was 1557, under King Henry VIII, who created the act. But it was adapted, right, to say that, and you can find this on, if you go on to legislation.gov.uk, you can see this act, which is fundamentally the most important act that you should know about if you know anything about law, or if you don't, You should be taught this at school, but of course they don't want you to know about this, because if you know about the ZKB Act and how it all works, you can then manipulate it, which is what I do, right? So they created the ZKB Act, which basically said that you have got 7 years from when you are born, 7 years to come forward and claim you're a living human being, right? If you read on legislation.gov.uk, you'll see where it says that. Where beyond the seas, beyond spelt with an E on the end, because it's Old English, beyond the seas for 7 years, right? Which is why a child is known as master, right? Because a master is a sovereign, the highest of the rank, right? Mister doesn't mean what you think it means. Mister means trade or art. It comes from an ancient English word, mystery, spelled M-I-S-T-E-R-Y, right? And what it means is trade or art. So it's your title, and title, again, is a legal term, okay, a title deed, right? A title deed for the legal fiction, which is written, your birth certificate is basically a certificate for a trust, right? You become the beneficiary of that trust, right? And you remain only the beneficiary of that trust until you declare yourself as that trust, right? So my name on my birth certificate is David Paul Stewart, right? Everybody I know who knows me calls me Davey, right? Apart from my other half, who calls me Babe or some choice words, most 4 letters. And my kids who refer to me as Dad, right? But everybody else knows me as Davey. Anybody who I want to know me knows me as Davey, right? So in my home, nobody comes into my home and says, David Paul Stewart, and I go, yeah, right? Doesn't happen. So I'm not declaring myself as the trust, because when you declare yourself as the trust, what you're doing is actually declaring yourself as the trustee of that trust, right? That's all you're doing. When you say, if I say my name is David Paul Stewart, I'm saying I am no longer a living human being, albeit temporarily, right? I am no longer a living human being, right? I am a trust and the trustee of that trust. And the trustee's job is to settle all liabilities for the trust, which is why, have you ever been to court, right? So you go to court, the first thing the clerk of the court does is get you to confirm your full name, right? And that's so that you declare yourself as the trustee of that trust. Therefore, now they can speak to you, because the trustee and the trust itself is a dead entity. The living can't speak to the dead can't speak to the living, right? And that's the basis of law. The dead can't speak to the living. So even if you could prove, let's say when you're 6 years old, and you had the knowledge and foresight to come forward and say, well, I'm going to claim my status, as a 6-year-old child. I'm going to claim my living status and say I'm not any longer beyond the seas, or never have been. Who are you going to communicate that to? Because I've had people say, oh, well, you can claim your living status with an ecclesiastical deed poll. I thought, well, that's all dead entities, right? That's all legal fictions, deed and title and all that stuff. It's all nonsense, right? It exists in their fraudulent system. So if I'm saying, as let's say I'm a 6-year-old child, if I'm saying as a 6-year-old child, I am a living being, then how can I speak to a dead entity to tell them that I'm a living being? I can't, right? So what I do is when they come to my door, right, first and foremost, I don't communicate with any of these organisations at all. I don't give them forewarning of anything, I don't plead with them, I don't do any of that whatsoever. I'm 55 years old now. I've never ever owned a TV licence in my life. I have never ever paid poll tax, community charge or council tax, ever. Not one penny, right? I've had dozens of bailiffs come round over in my lifetime, and not once have they got a penny out of me or anything from me. Every time they're sent back.
But don't some people get sent to prison for not paying council tax?
Right, so no, what they get sent to prison for is contempt of court. Because what they do is they go into court, right, and they say, you know, they declare that they're the trustee of the trust. They give their name when told to do so. They give them their address when told to do so, right? Which basically gives the court the authority. So then, when they start saying things to the judge or the magistrate, I'm not paying, yeah, they're committing contempt of court because you've already given them the judge or the magistrate the authority. How you should respond when you go into a court, right, is first of all, never ever go into the dock, okay? They're going to want you to go into the dock because the dock, again, is a shipping term, right? It's classed as, that's why a courtroom is made to look, it's all wooden panelled, made to look like the deck of a ship, yeah, but being in dry dock. So that way they can bring admiralty law onto the land, right, by pretending that the land is actually part of the sea, right? So that's why you stand in the dock, because while you're in the dock, you're under admiralty law, right? Any court that you see that's got a Union Jack, right, will also have the gold braiding. The gold braiding around the Union Jack signifies that the country of the flag under the admiralty law jurisdiction. So the Crown Corporation is nothing more than a ship, the name of a ship, essentially, right? Your name is nothing more than a ship, which is why you would go and do an apprenticeship, yeah, or lots of other names with the name ship, trades with the name ship on the end, you know, citizenship, exactly. So you're classed as a vessel, a ship, yeah, under admiralty law. Because admiralty law is the law that governs all commerce, all trade. And it was obviously first introduced to make sure that people make good on their promises, right? So, you know, they could be sought and dealt with and have their stuff taken and given to them in payment and stuff. So, to create trust, which is why trust is used so often in financial services, because everything, it's all based on trust, okay? So yeah, when you go into court, right, how you identify in court, first of all, you don't go in the dock, you stand there, you don't stand up and sit down when you're told to do so, because nobody is above you, okay? You are sovereign, yeah? So what you do then is when they say, can you give us your full name? You say, my name, for example, would be, my name is Davey and I am the representative and beneficiary of David Paul Stewart, right? And I would have my birth certificate there. Because that birth certificate is David Paul Stewart, it's just a piece of paper, right? Certificate that says that's registered as a trust, okay? Now, a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, I've heard you can access your trust. Like there's a big pool of money somewhere in a vault, yeah, that, you know, the government use, but you have a means to go and get that. Well, maybe that's true, but you don't have a means to go and get that. Do you know what I mean? Because you're not alive. You've got no authority. Excuse me. You've got no authority because you're not alive to them. So if you come forward, if I came forward saying, I am David Paul Stewart, yeah, and I want my money, yeah, as the beneficiary of that trust, they will say, well, who is David Paul Stewart? David Paul Stewart is the trust, therefore responsible for the liabilities. You're the trustee. It doesn't mean you're declaring yourself as the beneficiary.
It's a very grey area.
So it's a very grey area, and I don't believe it's possible because of the way the two systems operate. I mean,
We don't know anyone who's done it, do we?
I don't know anyone who's done it. I don't know anyone who's done it. I know people who claim, to send off register the ecclesiastical deed poll, which basically states proof of life, etc., etc. All the threats by the system when it comes to registering your child's birth are all empty threats. There has never ever in the history of this country been a prosecution, right, a successful prosecution, or even an attempted prosecution for somebody not registering their child's birth. But there's always been the threat, up to £1,000.
He's got a little granddaughter.
But the reason being,
he hasn't done it yet.
the reason being is because they can only threaten the legal fiction. They can't threaten the sovereign man. They can only threaten the legal fiction. And you get to choose when you stand under that legal fiction. You're indoctrinated from birth, right? It's your brain is a computer. It's an organic computer. It's just like any other computer. These are all the peripherals that attach to that computer and operated by that computer, right? So the problem is the operating system you're running, right, is the government's operating system. They installed it through the schooling system, right? They installed that operating system every single day. When you had registration, when you came in the morning and in the afternoon, after lunch, right, they call out all of your names, right, and get you to identify as that legal fiction, so you get used to it. You get that association. Because you're not known as that in your home from birth, and as a toddler, right, you have to be taught that. You have to be taught over time, right, that every time we shout your name, you say yes sir or yes miss. Right, every time, right? That's an indoctrination program. They're programming their minds so that they automatically identify. If somebody says to me, David Stewart, whether I answer them verbally or not, I'm at least going to look because it's just in there. It's a program, and you can't get that program out. You can override it. You can learn to override it with a more powerful program you create yourself. So, this is fully programmable. And all of you are programmers. All of you program organic computers every single day. Everything you do affects everything everybody else does. So, and their routine and their timings and everything, which affects everybody they come into contact and everyone they come into contact with. So you're all computer programmers, but you don't realise that. And when you realise that, you realise how you can change those programs and that repetitive behaviour. Right? So they've indoctrinated you from birth to always respond with yes, right? And when you do, it's always with authority, right? Which is why I tell people that when you get a bailiff or a so-called authority, police, whoever it may be, right? Always try and ascertain their first name. That's the first thing you need to do. You need to ascertain their first name. Now, if it's a police officer you're dealing with, it's quite easy to ascertain the first name. If you ask them, they're probably not going to tell you. Okay, they'll identify by their robot number, right? Because they're programmed robots, right? Never ask them to identify by their program number, right? So a lot of people say, identify yourself. What's your collar number? Well, you're telling them, don't identify as a human being, identify as the robot you were trained to be by the state. If you can use their first name, then you're speaking to the human being inside that robot. Because all their friends will refer to them by their first name, their social circles. Right? So that programming is set in their heads, right? Which is why they're trained not to give you their first name. So when you do that, you're then speaking to the human. It's a psychological trick, okay? You're then speaking to the human. How you ascertain that is just simply by asking, can I see your warrant card? Do it very politely, and then they'll happily oblige. Don't worry about looking for what station they're from or what the surname is. Just look for the first name. That's the only information you need, right, to bring them down beneath you, okay? And then when you use that name, so if they say, for example, if it says on it, Chris, right? So say to them, right, thank you, Chris, So now they've gone, what? I'm not used to, out of my social circle, being called Chris, because their bosses don't call them Chris. Do you know what I mean? They're normally called by the surname or by a nickname. That's generally what they do, because they want to disassociate, they want to indoctrinate them not to use their first names, because it normalises them, humanises them too much. Yeah? So you need to try and speak to that human. And then what you do, when you're trying to assert something upon them, right, with them, you use the full version of that name. So no longer Chris, that their mates would use. You now use Christopher, that their authorities would use, their mum and dad would have used, or their school teachers would have used, their headmaster would have used, yeah, their boss would have used when they're interviewing them, and so on and so forth. So, or when they have to be referred to by name, they'll refer to them by the registered legal fiction. So that's how you can kind of tip the balance and speak to the human, because if you've got them turn up because bailiffs have called them, right? What you want to do is get to that human being inside, and then get them to picture how they would feel, right? But so you'd say to them, come on, Chris, how would you feel? Yeah? How would you feel, Chris, if they came to your home and terrified your family? Make them picture, you know, what the kids are going through. Make them picture what his wife would be going through. Do you know what I mean? And the stress caused and the harm. Really lay it on thick, but keep using that name. Because as soon as you get them to register as a robot, they're acting as a robot. They just go by their training programs. Simple as that. Right, so going through this pack, one thing you want to do is put one of these up on your property. Okay, private property, no trespassing notice. Okay, now the reason you need one of these up, whether you ever use it or not, is because without it, there is always an implied right of access to your property. Always exists automatically as a default state, right? And it only disappears as a default state when you either verbally let people know, right, and therefore they are now aware, or you have a sign up, or both, right? So put this in your window where it can be seen upon entry to your property, maybe on the fence outside, on a post somewhere, on your door if you want to. There's two of these. So there's an A4 and an A5. So there's two of them because you can put one at the back of your property and one at the front of your property, right? So cover your back door or your gate or whatever, and one at the front, right? So what these do is take away the automatic implied rights of access that exist in law, right? Until they've been removed, they exist, right? And of course, if you move into a property or buy a new property, it doesn't normally come with signs, you know? You normally would have to... It doesn't matter if you rent. It doesn't matter if you rent. So, although this will refer to, it says owner/tenant on it, but it doesn't matter, because whilst you're renting, yeah, not even your landlord has the right to just come in. Your landlord would have to seek your permission to come in, okay, under the law. So they have to have permission, because your home is classed in law, right? It's kind of like castle doctrine, yeah? Man's home is his castle attitude, but we don't officially have castle doctrine in this country. They have it in America, they just call it castle law, right? But the principle remains in law, okay, that your home is your castle. So laws are made around that basis, yeah, which is why if you look up on the government website, gov.uk website, you will see, you can search for bailiffs, and it will tell you exactly what they can and can't do. They can't push past you, they can't lay a finger on you at all, okay? So they can't push past you, it doesn't matter, because no matter what warrant they have, it doesn't allow for physical force to be used. Even when the word force is used, it doesn't mean physical force. And the government made that very clear. So there's only three things they can break into your home for, right? Again, they still can't attack you personally or touch you personally, but there's only three things, and that is criminal fines, income tax, or stamp duty. Those are the only three things. Everything else, right, they can only make entry, right, where first of all there's an implied right of entry because there's no sign, yeah, and also only through an open door or gate or a normal means of entry. So if you've got your window wide open, they can't climb in it. That's an unlawful entry.
So what is the difference with these three things, like criminal fines? Does that mean driving?
It's because this is all to do with the government. So, I mean, we'll come on later to how you can settle those particular fines and stuff like that.
Most fines get passed off to a debt collector, don't they?
Yeah, essentially, yeah, and it's not done lawfully anyway. It's their system is if you knew exactly how it worked, you'd be shocked that you ever even fell for it. You know what I mean? So yeah, this basically the beginning bit of this tells you who cannot come onto your property. Okay.
What did you say? You said criminal fines, income tax, and what was the next one?
Stamp duty is another one. Excuse me. All things that benefit the Crown directly, really.
Yeah.
Funny enough.
Yeah.
Right, so entry by officers, representatives, agents or contractors of HM government, charities or private corporations is strictly prohibited, including but not limited to local authority, police, sheriffs, bailiffs, debt collectors, civil enforcement, high court enforcement, hawkers, which is people selling their wares door to door, or any agents or parties acting on behalf of a charity or private corporation. All rights, powers, privileges and immunities, whether actual, contingent or prospective, are reserved in common law, no consensual power of attorney. So that's saying none of them people that you've listed there can come in. And they are the only one, because you include corporations. Charities, corporations, TV licensing is a corporation. The bailiffs are a corporation at the end of the day, right? They're all corporations. Because corporation, of course, means dead speak. Corp comes from corpse, corpus, meaning dead, or the body, and oration means to speak. So, right, so the next bit, the owner/tenant reserves the right of entry for patrons and emergency services, because you're not going to deny emergency care if somebody has a heart attack in your house. You're not going to deny the ambulance service entry. Postal and delivery services, so you can still get your packages and parcels and letters. Family, friends, clients, or tradesmen/women by appointment. So they can't just turn up. An appointment is an agreed, which means agreed between two parties. They can't just demand, we're turning up on that day and that's an appointment. You haven't made an appointment with me, you've only made an appointment with yourself, that's it, right? So, the notice of liability. Statutory legislation does not apply. Any violators of this notice may be held liable in their private individual capacity with a sum of not less than £2,500. Now, on some of these notices you'll get on the internet, you'll have ones that say £250,000. But the way I see that is it's ridiculous. How are you going to be able to get a writ to go after them for that money, right? You can't do it in a small claims court. It has to be less than £10,000, okay? In £10,000, you can go after them in a small claims court just by you putting in the claim alone means that they automatically owe it, right? Even if they don't. They automatically do until proven otherwise. So if they don't turn up at court, right, because they don't take it seriously, then the order is given against them. They default, and it's given in your favour. So always do an amount or a series of amounts, because this has got 4 different amounts listed within it for different acts. This is known as a tacit consent contract, right? This is no different to if you park in a private car park and you agree to the terms and conditions that are up on the wall or on the board next to the pay machine. Okay, you agree to those terms and conditions by your actions, and that's what tacit consent is. Okay, it's consent by your actions. If you do this, right, you owe this. Yeah, that's what this is, tacit consent. So when they come onto your property, because they should leave straight away as soon as they see no trespassing, private property, no implied rights of access, they should leave. If they fail to, yeah, they now owe you £2,500. But also, it says, upon raising the attention of the occupants, all violators of this notice excuse me, agree to pay a fee of £1,000 to the owner/tenant of the private property. Now, raising the attention could just mean, it could mean bang, bang, bang on your door, right, as they normally would, or it could just be you can see them through your window walking up the pathway. They've raised your attention. They should have seen the notice, they should have left. Now, normally, you wouldn't chase them for this unless they refused to leave and gave you enough aggravation for you to say, do you know what, I'm going to show them and teach them a lesson, right? So, £1,000. So they've already trespassed, £2,500. Now, they've knocked on your door, that's now £3,500 they owe you, okay? All lawful occupants within the property reserve the right to use physical force in the removal of any violators of the trespass notice. Upon the use of physical force, the trespass violator agrees to pay a fee of not less than £5,000. So what that means is that you can, because it's a civil trespass and they have no right to be there, they have no warrant of entry or anything like that, right? You can use reasonable force. Now, reasonable force isn't kicking them in the balls and punching them in the face, okay? Reasonable force means you can just gently move them off of your property, right? If you bump into them, you bump into them. It's not an assault, right? If they resist you, they commit an offence of aggravated assault. And you could, if you wanted to, call the people and report them for aggravated assault and insist on getting a crime number, right? For your records. So, now, if a police officer does turn up, right, like I say, apart from the bit of ascertaining his first name, the first thing you try and establish, right, try and avoid getting him to identify himself as the police. Even if he starts saying, my name's PC, just say, sorry, just hold on a moment. Can I just, before you say any of that, can I just see your warrant card? Yeah. So cut him off from that line of, information. Okay. Cut him off from that. Say, sorry, can I just first see your warrant card? That's all I need to see, and then I'm happy to accept that you are a police officer. Yes, fine. There you go. Thank you, Chris. Right. Okay. So I am PC. No, you're Chris. Okay. Right, Chris. What can I do for you, Chris? Keep it focused on Chris, yeah? Don't let him finish that sentence because he's trying to reset and identify himself as that robot, right? Because when he does, then his training kicks in, yeah? So you want to take him out of that comfort zone. That's what you want to do, him or her, So, they can't get involved in the civil trespass or anything like that. All they can do is prevent a breach of the peace. Now, of course, the reality is they do often get involved. Although some of them will believe they have the right to get involved. Well, he says he's got a warrant. It says on his screen, granted. Yeah, well, that's not a warrant. You're a police officer. You should know what a warrant looks like. Yeah, no, that's good enough for us. We're accepting that, so we are going to assist them. I've had that from a bailiff before when I got rid of them from my sister's flat. She lives on the fifth floor. And she had a bailiff turn up when my daughter, at the time was 15, was round her flat. So my daughter said, I'll go and answer the door. So she answered the door, and it was a bailiff, my sister, for council tax. And she said, I'll just go and get her. Yeah? And as she walked back down the hallway, she forgot to close the door. If you're going anywhere to get anything, always shut that door. Yeah? Always shut it and lock it if it's one that can be opened from outside. Okay. However, you know, it wasn't shut, so he walked straight in. Well, of course, my sister, fiery 5'4" redhead, right, came charging down the hallway and shoved him straight out the door. Caught her foot at the time on his boot, left her with a bit of a bruise, so now she's got proof of assault, he's got no proof of assault, okay? So he called the police, yeah? My nephew called me, right? I was a few minutes away. I turned up. When I turned up, the police had just arrived on the ground floor and they were talking to the bailiff. So I went up in the lift and went into my sister's flat, and I said, right, I'll answer the door when they turn up. So door knocks. There was 6 police officers there. There was 2 more downstairs, so 8 police officers they sent for a 5'4" woman, you know, shoving a big burly shaved head man out of her door. So now the great thing is, obviously lived in a flat on the 5th floor, there's no back door, so it's the only way in and out, right? So then he couldn't shove past her again, he couldn't attack her or anything like that, he had no option. I'll ring the police. Well, when they turned up and I answered the door, the officer said, right, we're here to facilitate this man. I said, whoa, 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 stop there. I said, no, you're not. Well, yes, we are. I said, no, you're not here to facilitate anything, sunshine. I said, your job is to prevent a breach of the peace. I said, if you don't believe me, you've got a radio, contact your superior officer and ask him if you're there to prevent a breach of the peace or to facilitate a bailiff. So he got on his radio, and of course it came back, it was on silent so I couldn't hear it, but it obviously came back in his earpiece to say, no, you can't get involved, right? So he said, right, okay, we're going to go, we're just going to leave, there's nothing we can do here. And he said to the bailiff, he said, I suggest you do the same. He said, just go back to your office and report it with your office that they're not allowing you in. So it was as simple as that. Now he'd already entered, he'd been assaulted, he'd been shoved out the door physically, right? But she hadn't given him a right to come into her property. He had no actual warrant, lawful legal warrant, right? So she had every right to shove him out the door. Yeah, she told him, get out of my flat. Sounded like Barbara Windsor in EastEnders. But yeah, so they won't always act lawfully and legally.
Excuse me, you mentioned, she pushed him up, but you mentioned you got special attention to the fact that there were no bruises or nothing like that.
There was no bruising on him, there was a bruise on her foot. So if she wanted to, she could have pressed charges. So if the police had said, right, well, to the bailiff, do you want to press charges for assault, right? He would have to consider the fact that she's got physical assault there. Do you know what I mean? So therefore, and because he's a big burly guy and she's a little...
So what kind of grounds might he have for when you have this discussion with police for saying, I've been assaulted?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Well, the bailiff, right?
Yeah.
Is there any grounds where he could say, what could you do?
Well, as soon as he says, I've been assaulted, they're going to come out anyway. What you can do about that is pretty much nothing. If they want to come out, they want to come out. And they will come out. If he wants to ring them, he'll ring them. He won't ring them until he's assaulted. Yeah. So that's important to remember. Never ever put a finger on him. Instead, you can do what my younger brother generally does, and torment them. Torment the hell out of them, have a right old laugh with them. Right? They had one turn up to my sister, again, I think it was for the same debt, but it was a time before, when she was living somewhere else with her boyfriend. And they turned, now her boyfriend had a lot of cars, he had like, I think, 2 or 3 cars on his driveway, and he was in a upstairs flat, downstairs flat. He was on the ground floor. So the upstairs also had a car on the driveway. And when the bailiff turned up, he parked across the driveway. My sister's boyfriend was at work at the time, so my sister was there, I was there, my brother was there. We'd gone round to see my sister. The bailiff had just turned up and without even knocking had clamped the front 2 cars, because the 2 cars behind it then couldn't get out, right? Clamped the front 2 cars, thought he was really cocky, he's got leverage now, he's got vehicles there that he can take and settle the debt. But, unfortunately for him, me and my brother were there, and especially my brother, who just completely tormented him the entire time because he'd actually clamped upstairs car, right? And they proved that it was their car, so he had to unclamp it. The only problem with that is he'd locked his keys in the car, right? So he couldn't unlock the clamp. And this guy from upstairs, hench man, right? Proper hench, proper bodybuilder hench guy, very angry that his car's been clamped. And this guy's blocking the entrance, which is illegal, by the way, if they park across a drop curb, that's illegal.
It's only illegal if there's vehicles there, because if the drive's empty, it's not illegal.
Well, if the drive's empty, they're not going to park there anyway.
No.
You know, if the drive's empty, they're going to tuck out away somewhere and then sneak up on their property, trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd locked his keys in the car, right? So he couldn't undo this clamp, which he knew he had to undo, right? Then it started pissing down, like hammering it down, right? So we're standing there with umbrellas. He didn't have a jacket on, this guy, just had his t-shirt and padded vest, and he's standing there getting abuse from my brother under an umbrella, right? Who's every single person that walked past, he's going, hey, look at this dickhead, look, it's clamped the wrong car, then locked his keys in the car, now it's pissing down raining, look at the state of it, look, drowned rat. Do you know what I mean? He had a lot of fun with him. This guy, you could see, he was going to get some stick when he got back to the office, right? He was not happy, and all he wanted to do was get out of there quick, right? So he had to phone recovery, and recovery come to, you know, get him into his car to get his keys so he could unlock the clamp and the other clamp. He was going to unlock both clamps, so he could get out of there, right? But then my sister's other half turned up, because obviously she'd spoken to him on the phone, he was a builder. He turned up, screeches up in his white van, jumps out, lunges for the guy and shoves him. Well, straight away, on the phone, right, 5 police cars turned up, right, 5 police cars. He literally just went up and shoved him. 5 police cars turned up. They nicked him for assault. Also, because the the recovery hadn't turned up yet at this point, right? It was also, by the police turning up, they allowed him to sit in the car in the dry because it was chucking it down, right? So my brother's method, right, of taunting this guy, right, was getting to him psychologically, but he couldn't do anything about it, nothing about it at all. My brother wasn't breaking any laws, couldn't do anything about it. But a second my sister's boyfriend turned up and put his hands on him, whole different situation. Now he's got cover in a police car with protection, lots of other police cars. Now he's got leverage and authority. He still wants to get the hell out of there, but they waited around for the recovery truck to come and get him into his car. Then he undid the clamps and he left. So how you deal with them is really, if you start going shouting abuse at them, you're just going to spark their ego. Yeah, you're going to spark their ego, and it then becomes a battle of egos. Yeah, if you taunt them, yeah, they then feel kind of shame and a bit embarrassed and a bit like, oh, I just want to get out of here, and start getting anxiety with being there, but you know, they're getting taunted. So how you deal with it, you know, depends on the outcome of the situation, really. If you really want to go shoving them about, well, it's not going to end well for you. So, anyway, if you do have to remove them physically from the property using reasonable force, they now owe you a further £5,000. That's now £8,500 they owe you. It says down the bottom here that if they clamp your vehicle, right, they owe you a further £1,000. Okay, so they now owe you £9,500. You can collect that in a small claims court. You can sue them for that amount. Okay, so you can use that as a threat towards them. You now owe me this money. What I would recommend to people is when they call, if you've got this sign up on your window or on your wall or on your door, whatever, the first thing they're going to do is come to me and go, are you Mr. David Stewart? I'll say, who are you? And they'll say, I'm blah, 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 blah. And I'll go, have you got any ID? Yeah, I've got ID. So, I need to talk, did you see the sign? Yeah, yeah, I saw the sign, yeah. Okay, how would you like to pay? What do you mean? Well, how would you like to pay? You saw the sign, you continued to trespass, you owe me £2,500. You knocked on my door, that's another £1,000, right? You clamped my car. Why'd you clamp my car? Yeah? You have no right to clamp my car. Oh, yes, we do. We've got a no. Who am I? Who am I? Well, Mr. David Stewart. Who said I was Mr. David Stewart? Essentially, what you're doing is trying not to make any statements whatsoever. Ask only questions. Answer every question with a question. Ask only questions, right? Because when you're asking questions, you are as king, right? As sovereign, demanding an answer from those beneath you, right? So by answering their question, you're giving them the authority. You're basically, instead of saying to them, F off, I'm not answering your questions. What's got to do with you? What obligation have I got to answer your questions? Who do you think you are? Yeah. So that's what you're doing. That's why the word is asking as king, right? Those asking the question is the authority. Yeah. So if they're asking the question, they're trying to be the authority. By answering the question, you're saying, I give you that authority, right? By asking another question instead, you haven't answered that question, they have no authority. Okay? So you don't give them that authority. Only ask questions. What are you doing here? Who are you? Have you seen the sign? How would you like to pay? Yeah? Because if they can't get you to identify yourself as the person, as the dead entity, remember they're a dead entity too. They can't speak to you. Right? And under GDPR regulations, they can't speak to somebody who hasn't identified themselves as being that person being persona. You had your hand up.
Yeah, if your vehicle's down the road,
Yeah.
it's clamped, is it still covered under this?
Right, so if
your vehicle's on your property.
Your vehicle, in your pack, you should have one of these, which you put where your tax disc used to be. And what this is basically says that if you attach anything at all to my vehicle, whether a ticket or a device of any description, such as a clamp, you owe me £250, plus any charges incurred in me chasing you for that debt. So again, it's a tacit consent contract.
Is that even with council fines like a ticket?
It doesn't matter. If anyone puts anything on your vehicle, because if they want to chase you for a fine, they don't need to put things on your vehicle these days. Yeah, they can do it all electronically with cameras, and they can take a picture of it. They've got the registration number, right? So they don't need. The reason they put a ticket on there is it's like a fishing exercise, yeah. Because then you take that ticket and you go to them to pay it, which basically means you're saying I am liable as the trustee of this trust, right? So that's why they would put So if somebody puts a ticket on, remove it. You know, chuck it in the bin. Don't respond to it. When they chase you for it, right, you say, how do you know that was my car? Well, that's your number plate. Have you ever heard of vehicle cloning? 1.7 million vehicles on the roads in the UK, they say are cloned, right? 1.7 million. Now, I looked this figure up recently when I was acting as a Mackenzie friend for somebody in court, right, for a speeding offence. So, still ongoing, it was adjourned, but still ongoing, we've got to go back in August. But it's about proving it. It's like when you're caught on a traffic speed camera, yeah, a flash from behind, yeah. That could be anybody's car, yeah. That could be anybody's car at all. It doesn't mean it's your car because it's got your number plate, because I could knock up a number plate in 5 minutes. I've got all the equipment at home to do it if I wanted to, you know, and or you could go and buy one from somewhere and slap it on your car to, if you don't want to have, you know, get pulled over. So
How many did you say? 1.7?
1.7 million vehicles, that's according to police. Right, certain police forces claim that, I think they said something like up to 20% of vehicles on the road they suspect are cloned. Yeah, 1 in 5. Phenomenal. But they say the reason being is because of the huge rise in like vehicle road tax and insurance policies and you know, fuel and ULEZ and all of that sort of stuff. So especially probably ULEZ, and you'll probably find that figure will rise with the introduction of low traffic neighbourhoods and ultra low emissions
What
zones.
happens
So
if they get caught cloning a number plate?
if they get caught, then somebody who clones a number plate, then it's a fraud. It's classed as a fraud. You're claiming it to be something it isn't, and you're doing that as a driver, which is a legal term, because under common law you're not a driver, you're a traveller. It's a very different definition. So when you say you're a driver, you register, remember, you release your sovereignty. Also your car, your vehicle, right? Vehicle is a legal term. It's not a common law term, it's a legal term. So you would be travelling in your private conveyance, yeah, under common law. Travelling under your, yeah, did I say driving?
No, I was just saying.
Oh, right. Yeah, you're travelling in your private conveyance, but driver is actually, the term means travelling whilst acting in commerce, right? So it actually means acting commercially. And of course, when you act as your trust, you're acting commercially, because that's all to do with commercial. Right, so now you could, if you're very good at it, stick to your guns and, you know, get a, I don't believe you can deregister a vehicle. I know some people believe you can. I don't believe it's possible, right? Because registration is handed over to the state, yeah, on first registration. So when you buy a brand new car, right, before you get the car, it's registered with the government, right? If it's registered with the government, it means it's been gifted to the government, and the government allow you to use it as a driver, yeah? So as the registered keeper, yeah, which is what it states on the document. So you're just the registered keeper of the vehicle, it's owned by the state, so they wouldn't have provided any method for you to claim that back and say that's now mine. Do you know what I mean? So people say, but I own this vehicle, so I want to deregister it from your system. Well, you can't. There isn't a method to do that. But I'm a common law living man. Well, then how are you talking to us? Because we're dead entities. The living can't talk to the dead, and the dead can't talk to the living. So we don't have to service your requirements. Yeah, that's our property. Yeah, you agreed to that when you purchased it, whether you realised it or not. You know, the only way you could do it legitimately is to either build your own car, motorised conveyance, or buy one abroad and don't register it. You know, don't register it. It could be deregistered if it's going abroad, so maybe that's a method of doing it. Say that it's going abroad, being shipped abroad, then it can be deregistered in this country, right? So,
But still use it here.
but well, then you would have to claim, well, it has gone abroad. It's gone out of that jurisdiction into my jurisdiction,
Right.
which is a different world to your jurisdiction. Depends how you argue it. Anything is arguable in law. Do you know what I mean? Anything has both sides to an argument. So, you know, although they may think they've got you trapped, there are always ways out. There's always loopholes, always. So, yeah, this notice basically, it won't necessarily stop them taking your car, but it gives you some kind of legal comeback and redress. They've agreed to pay for, 250, but it might be enough to put off a recovery driver. Yeah, when you tell them that you are agreeing to these terms and conditions, because this is a tacit consent contract, mate. If you attach that hook on the front, you've attached the device. You now owe me 250 quid. Yeah, I can now chase you for that in the court. They may say, do you know what? I'm not being personally liable. Or they may say, yeah, take it up with them. Do you know what I mean? But you've then got something you can then go to the court and say, I'd like to claim my £250 plus my time and expenses, my legal time and expenses, just like any other authority would, like the council do. They claim their expenses and legal fees and stuff like that. So you could do the same. So that 250 could end up with like a couple of grand, and you could be sending bailiffs round to them.
So can I use that instead of a parking permit?
You could do, whether, it's a risk, it's always going to be a risk you take. It's down to personal preference. How much do you want to fight it? Now, I could travel, right, in my private conveyance if I wanted to, but I class myself as a driver, right? I pay my insurance, I pay the tax, I get the MOT, reluctantly, but at the end of the day, I've got places to be, places to go. I don't want to have to fight with a police officer every 5 minutes and then go up the road and have to fight with another one. I'm pulled over, it takes me 2 hours to get a 10-minute journey. Do you know what I mean? Because I keep getting pulled over. It won't stop you getting pulled over. There are loopholes, there are things you can do. There are trusts that you could join where you have, what's it called now? I forgot the name of it, but you either have insurance or you have another kind of certificate, which is what the wealthy have, basically, that says that we don't need a separate company, we are our own liability. I've got enough funds to cover, in my personal wealth or the business or whatever, to cover that. So it's like a liability thing, and police officers recognise that. Right, as soon as you show them that, or tell them that, whatever, they accept that. Right, but if you don't have that, in the absence of that, and I don't know, maybe you have to apply to get that to the DVLA or whatever to get that and prove that you've got above a certain wealth to cover it, or that it's covered on some other public liability insurance or something, then you'll get the certificate. But they try and make it difficult for the average Joe. They try and make it as difficult as possible. But unfortunately, their laws, they don't just operate in their favour, they operate in ours too, because it's not their laws. It's an international thing, it's Maritime Admiralty law. And you can exploit it just like they can exploit it. So, and how they often do exploit it. So, have this up in your property, and focus all of the conversation and attention, first of all, on questions only. Never identify yourself, right? Questions only. And then focus on the trespass element. You're not going to discuss what they want to discuss. You're not going to talk about that. You're not even going to acknowledge that debt. Because if you don't do that, they can't speak to you. Under the law, they can't speak to you. They need you to identify yourself. In order to be able to deal with it. So have this up on your property. Right, I'm going to take a quick 10-minute break in case anyone wants to go to the toilet or anything, get a drink. And then I'm going to move on to, actually just before quickly I do, I'll just go through this one. This sheet here is the printout from the government website. It has got a spelling mistake down the bottom, but that's on the government website, I'm afraid. When it used the word public offence, and it's not meant to say offence, it's meant to say office, right down the very bottom. But what this is, Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015, Section 26. Right, need glasses for this one. Corrupt or other improper exercise of police powers and privileges. Section 26 makes it an offence for a police officer and certain other persons to exercise improperly the powers and privileges of a constable. It supplements the existing common law offence of misconduct in public office. Subsection 1 provides that a police constable, defined in subsection 3, commits an offence if he or she exercises the powers and privileges of a constable improperly and the officer knows or ought to know that it is improper. Subsection 2 provides that a person guilty of the offence is liable on conviction of indictment to a sentence imprisonment of 14 years or a fine or both. I'm going to jump to subsection 4. Says, provides that a police constable exercises the powers and privileges of a constable improperly if the exercise of a power or privileges is for the purpose of achieving a benefit to the officer or a benefit or detriment for another person, and that a reasonable person would not expect the power or privilege to be exercised for the purpose of achieving that benefit or detriment. Now it goes on in subsection 9 to explain what benefit or detriment means. But what that essentially, in layman's terms, that means is that if a police officer turns up, right, he can't create any benefit or detriment to you or the bailiff. So he can't facilitate the bailiff doing something by threatening to arrest you if you refuse to let him in or refuse to move out of the way, right? He's committed a section 26 offence. Okay, of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015. Very serious offence with very serious consequences. So this sheet is laminated for a reason, so it doesn't deteriorate. So I would recommend you pin this on the inside of your door, so it's handy if they ever do, or have it somewhere where you can easily get to and you can remember where it is. Because if you show that to a police officer, he or she knows you've read that. And you know that, okay? They know now that you're aware of that, yeah? And they know about this offence as well. They know this is part of their training. They know about the Criminal Justice and Courts Act, section 26. So, and if they're in any doubt, if they're a new recruit, get them to speak to the superior officer or demand to speak to the superior officer, yeah? But do it in the form of a question and not a statement. Okay, do everything in the form of a question, not a statement. And it's worth, when I was here doing the my kids empowerment workshop, I got the kids to do sit opposite each other and ask each other questions, and whoever stumbled, stuttered, or couldn't think of anything, they were out, a bit like the old whack-a-day with Timmy Mallet and his big mallet whacking them on the head. But they couldn't, so they got marked down for repetition, hesitation, and what was the other one? Statement, right? So that way it trains them, right, to ask questions, answer questions with questions. So, what's your name? Do I have to answer that? Yeah. Now, if they make a statement, they've essentially lost that point, right? Yes, you do is a statement. Yeah. So you play it like that in your head. You're playing it like that. You're trying to win these points. Yeah. By not hesitating, you can repeat the question if you want to. That's fine. I've just done it with the kids, obviously, to get them to think of different questions and coming up with different responses. But it's worth training your own brain to do that, to just ask questions in response to questions. Because the second you answer it, whether you realise it or not, or understand it, aka stand under it, right? It means you've given them authority over you. You've said you've asked a question as king, yeah, and I've responded as somebody beneath you. What my response should have been is to ignore that, as a king would. If you asked a king a question, he would ignore you. He wouldn't answer your question. He doesn't feel he has any right to. Not right to, but he's not expected to. You answer his questions. He doesn't answer yours. And that's why when you're being interrogated by police, etc., they may say, I'm the one asking the questions. And you say, why do you feel you're the only one who's allowed to ask questions? Always, like I say, just get used to training yourself to only ask questions. Right.